Hello my friends, today we will be comparing Panasonic Lumix S1 against the current benchmark amongst the hybrid mirrorless cameras, Sony A7III. Both are 24 megapixel full-frame cameras intended for shooting both stills and video, but I have to say that these two are not very closely matched. 24 megapixel full-frame sensor and mirrorless construction are basically the only things that they have in common, so I guess that this could be pretty interesting comparison. In this video we will take a look at how these two cameras perform, and I will try to help you decide which full-frame mirrorless hybrid camera should you get. A7 III is currently cheaper in most parts of the world, so that is a first win for Sony. Maybe the most obvious difference between these two cameras is the size and the weight. As you can see, Panasonic S1 is much bigger and much heavier camera. The size is mostly a matter of product philosophy at Sony and Panasonic, which is completely opposite. Portability is the priority for Sony, so they are trying to pack as much technology as possible into very small camera body. On the other hand, Panasonic wants to keep the dimensions of classic DSLR body and use the extra space for adding more technology and controls. The build quality is really good on both. Panasonic has an edge here, it is built like a tank, it feels super solid and it is very comprehensively weather sealed. The materials on Sony are very high quality as well, it also feels premium, and it is also weather sealed, but not as comprehensively. The durability of coating is also not that great on Sony. The S1 has much larger grip, so there is much more space for your fingers. Both cameras use 24 megapixel full-frame sensor, but the difference is that Sony uses backside illuminated sensor, whereas the sensor in the S1 is probably not backside illuminated. Despite that, the results on my dynamic range seen are basically identical. At given settings, Panasonic exposes pictures a bit darker by about 1/3 of a stop. The level of noise is basically the same. ISO 3200 is very clean on both. ISO 6200 is still very usable and you can even do a lot of editing at ISO 6400. The noise is visible at ISO 12800, but it is still usable for smaller format publishing. ISO 25600 is in case of emergency option, but it is still usable for documentary purposes. Both cameras are excellent for low light shooting. It is basically the same story when it comes to dynamic range. You can recover a ton of information from both highlights and shadows to the point where you don't have to worry much about setting the correct exposure. The dynamic range should be around 15 steps on both, which is an excellent result. I'm not sure whether both use the same sensor, but the performance is almost identical. 24 megapixels is still optimal resolution for hybrid use. It is more than enough for most users and publishing platforms when it comes to stills. S1 has no low-pass filter, and it is not clear whether there is a low-pass filter on A7 III, but the amount of detail is excellent on both. At 24 megapixels, both cameras can also use full pixel readout for 4K video, which is not possible with high-resolution versions. I'm also very happy with colors out of these cameras. Panasonic has very nice colors just like with their Micro Four Thirds line. RAWs are a little bit toned down compared to JPEGs, so those are a very good starting point for editing. Sony's color science is very underrated in my opinion. I've recently been shooting with Samyang lenses during the golden hour, and I can say that I actually like A7 Mark III colors a lot at the moment. Panasonic probably still has an edge when it comes to JPEGs. Big advantage of Sony for video is picture profile 8 with gamma change to Cine 4. That is still my most favorite semi-flat picture style, which is the best compromise between the dynamic range and color grading options. An advantage of the S1 is 96 megapixel high resolution mode. It works on a tripod, the camera will stitch 8 pictures together and create one picture with huge amount of detail and information. Regarding the handling, that is again a matter of product philosophy. Panasonic S1 is in my opinion the best mirrorless full-frame camera in terms of the controls at the moment, but that comes at a price of decreased portability and also the weight, which decreases overall handling score a little bit. The buttons are very well positioned on the S1, I like the 3 buttons behind the shutter, there are also 2 extra buttons on the front of the camera and very useful lever that I use for silent mode. S1 also has dry mode dial and AF mode selector. I miss those a lot on A7 III. There is also lock switch on the S1, but I never use it. I actually like the controls on the A7 III as well. It still has 3 dials, a joystick, and even exposure compensation dial, which is not available on S1. Custom buttons are also very well positioned. Basically, the only things that I miss on A7 III are the dry mode dial and focus mode switch. There is also no status LCD on A7 III, which saves some space, and to be honest, I'm a new school shooter, so I don't miss that at all on A7 III, apart of the option to see the battery indicator when the camera is turned off on the S1. I also like the position of the power switch much more on the A7 III. Overall, the S1 is probably the best handling full-frame mirrorless camera at the moment, but the A7 III handling is probably as good as it can be at that size. The autofocus is one of the main differences between these two cameras. Sony uses hybrid autofocus system with 693 phase detection autofocus points and 425 contrast detection points. This autofocus is great, still the best in class, and maybe even beyond the class. It is incredibly fast and accurate, the tracking works great, it is 100% reliable, it works great even in low light. Overall, I have no complaints about the autofocus on A7 III at all. Panasonic has decided to stick with contrast-based DFD system. In usual situations such as the landscapes or focusing on non-moving subjects in good light, it works pretty well. In low light it gets a bit slower and there is some hunting, although it is still usable for usual situations. It can't match Sony A7 III autofocus, but the difference will mostly be visible in challenging situations such as the tracking of fast-moving subjects. S1 is not a sports camera, A7 III will be more suitable for that. It is similar in video. The S1 will be fine in easier situations, and I would say that it is all-around usable for situations where it is reasonable to use autofocus in video. Even the tracking works pretty well. The autofocus can also be customized on the S1, but faster and more responsive settings may introduce more hunting. A7 III still has better autofocus in video. It is 100% reliable and there is no hunting at all. The speed and responsiveness can be set in menu as well. It works great even in low light, it can be very smooth or very fast depending on the settings, and it works great even with Samyang AF primes. I understand Panasonic's reason for developing DFD system and I think that it has a future, but at the moment phase detection autofocus works better. Both cameras have some kind of intelligent autofocus. A7 III has great real-time eye autofocus which works great. Panasonic also has eye autofocus and object detection which works well as far as the detection goes, but the autofocus itself depends on the situation. Regarding the video features, both can shoot full sensor and full pixel readout 4K video. S1 can do that up to 30 frames per second. A7 III shoots full sensor in 24 and 25p, and there is 1.2 times crop in 30p. S1 can also shoot 4K 60p video with 1.5 times crop. That is definitely a nice option. Full sensor 4K 60p would be better, but A7 III can't shoot 4K 60p at all, so that is definitely an advantage for the S1. S1 also has much better 4K quality in Super 35 mode. I don't recommend using that on A7 III at all. 4K video on both is very detailed, the sharpness and overall look mainly depends on the picture profile or picture style settings. I shoot picture profile 8 with gamma change to Cine 4 on Sony, and I shoot flat picture style on Panasonic. Both work really well, although PP8 has more flexibility in editing and it captures more dynamic range. Flat picture style is closer to being ready out of the camera. You have basically endless options to customize both. S1 uses massive noise reduction if you shoot video with high ISO and default settings, so you might want to set that. Both are generally great for low light shooting. The S1 will also get 10-bit 422 recording and vlog soon, so that will make it more suitable for advanced filmmaking, but both are actually great video cameras as they are. One thing that I miss on both is 4096 by 2160 Cinema 4K. There are still some crop sensor cameras such as Fuji X-T3 and Panasonic GH5S that have more advanced video features, but if you want full-frame cinematic look, A7 III and S1 are great for that. Both cameras have in-body image stabilization, which is a must-have for all-round usable hybrid camera in my opinion. I wasn't able to make a direct comparison because I only have stabilized lens for the S1 and it will work together with in-body image stabilization to provide 6-stop advantage, so I don't know how does the in-body image stabilization work on its own. Dual IS is great, it makes a huge difference for handheld video, it is one of my most favorite things about the S1 and one of the main reasons why it might be worth carrying around that large camera body. A7 III also has in-body image stabilization, it is rated for 5 stops and it also helps a lot. It can't match the S1 of course, there is just not enough space for that, but considering how small it is, it does a very good job. It is good enough for static shots up to 35 or even 50 mm. It allows you to significantly decrease the shutter speed if you are shooting stills. Panasonic S1 has more effective in-body image stabilization though, and that also includes the boost mode with electronic stabilization. Two areas where the S1 destroys the A7 III are the viewfinder and the display. Both cameras use viewfinder with 0.78 times magnification, but the difference is that the S1 has 5.69 million dot resolution, whereas the A7 III only has 2.36 million dots. And you can definitely see the difference. S1 viewfinder is actually close to optical viewfinder. A7 III viewfinder is still fine to use and it will get the job done, but it somehow disconnects you from the shooting experience. It is the same story when it comes to display. S1 uses a bit larger 3.2-inch screen with 2.1 million dot resolution, and it is the best display that I have used so far. It is super sharp, very bright, and the colors are great as well. A7 III has 3-inch screen with 941,000 dots, and it is still fine to use except for outdoors use in bright sunlight, but it doesn't look very pleasing. Both screen and viewfinder are just 60 Hz on A7 III, the S1 can go up to 120 Hz in the viewfinder. You can't really tell whether the pictures look good until you import them into your computer with A7 III. Having said that, Sony had to spare some costs to meet $2,000 mark back at the beginning of 2018, and I still think that the viewfinder and display were quite reasonable places to do so, but Panasonic S1 is a clear winner here. User interface is another area when the S1 wins by a significant margin. It has the best user interface on the market, everything can be controlled using the touchscreen, it is well organized and well structured. On the other hand, Sony has UI that is usable, but it is outdated and you can't control it using the touchscreen at all. It is still possible to get used to it and there are some things that will help with that, such as customizable function menu, My Menu tab, custom buttons and so on. Sony definitely needs to improve that and I hope that they will do so as soon as possible. Both cameras have 2 card slots. S1 has one XQD and one UHS 2 compatible SD card slot. A7 III has 2 SD card slots, unfortunately only one is UHS 2 compatible. It is a controversial topic, but I am glad that both cameras have 2 card slots. Sony is more suitable for high-speed shooting because of the autofocus, and it can also shoot 10 frames per second in RAW using continuous autofocus and automatic exposure. Panasonic S1 can shoot 9 frames per second, but only with autofocus single. If you want continuous autofocus, it drops to 6 frames per second, which is still okay for this category. On the other hand, Panasonic S1 has huge buffer. It can take 90 RAWs and basically unlimited amount of JPEGs. The battery life is significantly better on Sony. It is rated for 710 shots, but realistically you can take more than 2000 shots or 3 hours of 4K video on a single charge. That is still the best battery life of any mirrorless camera. Panasonic S1 has a huge 3100 mAh battery, and it really needs that to power that in-body image stabilization, electronic viewfinder, monitor and other stuff. It is rated for 380 shots, which is about average, but it can go up to 1150 shots in saving mode, which is pretty good result. One more thing that is definitely worth considering is the lens selection. At the moment, Panasonic only makes 3 lenses for S1. Those are 24 to 105mm f4 kit lens, which is probably the best 24 to 105 f4 on the market, but it is pretty big and heavy. 70 to 200 f4 is also excellent, and 50mm f1.4 is optically one of the best lenses in the world. Other lenses will be released soon, but the problem is that there are no budget-friendly options and no lightweight options, not even on the roadmap. Leica lenses are irrelevant for most users because of the price. I'm also not the biggest fan of adapting DSLR lenses to mirrorless, which is what Sigma does, and unlike the E-mount, the L-mount is not an open standard, so the lens selection will probably be the most important thing for Lumix S line in the future. On the other hand, Sony has a huge selection of all kinds of lenses in all price categories and all size categories. There is also a ton of third-party options such as the Tamron 28 to 75mm f2.8, which I use most of the time, great Samyang autofocus primes, and so on. Sony has also proven that smaller mount diameter is not a problem for designing full-frame lenses. FE 24mm f1.4 GM is probably the best proof of that. You can also get an APS-C body to get more reach out of your full-frame lenses. Sony is also releasing a lot of new lenses such as the 200 to 600mm, so the lens selection is at the moment a big advantage of A7 III over the S1. Sigma makes mount adapters for both, so if you own a lot of Canon lenses, that is an option, but for me personally that is more of a short-term solution. To sum up, the main advantages of Panasonic S1 over the A7 III are more effective in-body image stabilization, handling and controls, screen and viewfinder, user interface, option to shoot 4K 60p, upcoming video upgrades, buffer capacity, and more rugged construction. The main advantages of the A7 Mark III over the S1 are significantly better autofocus in both stills and video, size and weight, battery life, lens selection, possibility to shoot more frames per second, and also the price. Both cameras have great dynamic range and low light capabilities, very detailed 4K video, and good color science. A7 III is generally more suitable for traveling, fast action shooting, and gimbal use. S1 is more suitable for slower pace shooting and low light shooting because of that in-body image stabilization. Overall, I think that both are great cameras, but both are very different, so I think that this time it should be pretty easy to choose between them based on what and how you intend to shoot, so I hope that this video helped you a little bit with that as well. So that's it for this video, thank you for watching, I hope that you liked this video and that you found it to be useful. Stay tuned for more videos and maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss my future content. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share your opinion, please do so in the comment section, and see you next time.